All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. We can be on time here. I appreciate you guys all jumping in. So I am going to go ahead and get this presentation going. I do have this being recorded just so we can go ahead and share it with some other folks later on. So thank you for participating, and just some housekeeping items, if you don't mind. Make sure that you're on mute. And like I said earlier, I do have my dog with me, taking a nap behind me. So if he starts barking or crying in his sleep, apologies ahead of time. So we are going to cover just what's happening in the real estate market in 2023 and what we can expect this year. So let's dive in. And as we cover these topics today, feel free, if at any point you have any questions, go ahead and throw it in the chat box. I'll try to keep an eye on that, or go ahead and just jump in and ask the questions, because I don't want to be talking the whole time. I want this to be interactive. So here's what we're going to go ahead and cover today. So the current state of the real estate market, kind of where we're at, so we know the current environment, and then how a recession could impact the real estate market as we move into 2023, why we have a shortage of homes, what that means, interest rates, they're certainly having a big impact on the real estate market, and then really what this means for you if you're a buyer, home seller, or an investor. So let's go ahead and jump in. So just a little bit about me. If we don't know each other, I see a few names on here I do recognize, but for those that don't know me, I'm Jackie White. I'm a realtor. I've lived in Colorado for 15 years. A little bit about me, here's some photos, and I am a mom. I've got 2 kids. I'm always running them around with all sorts of youth sports activities. I'm an average skier, but let me tell you, I'm an expert après skier. Very active family. I used to be in marketing, working for a number of Fortune 500 companies, helping them with their strategic marketing programs. And then I got into real estate about a decade ago when I bought my first investment property and then became a realtor in 2014. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also super active in my community, in the fire department, and also just in wildfire awareness and education. So started a nonprofit helping neighbors do fire mitigation and be aware of the threats of wildfire here in Colorado and what they can do to stay safe. And I also was elected to our local fire department, Intercanyon Fire Protection District, to their board of directors. So I actively serve in that role as well. And I think it was Ben Franklin that said, if you want something done, ask a busy person. Well, I can tell you, I can do whatever you need. So as of August 2022, I closed 250th home for buyers and sellers that I've helped over the last decade. And that's been a really rewarding time frame to be able to help people buy homes, their first home, investment properties, trade up, move out of state, all sorts of things in between. So it's been very rewarding for me to be able to meet so many great people and help them along their way with homeownership. So let's dive a little bit into market conditions and where we're at. So as you know, the media likes to sensationalize everything, right? So they say if it bleeds, it leads. So keep in mind that when you hear stuff in the news about what's happening in the real estate market, it's going to come from that lens of them trying to sell the headline. So we're going to talk about the real facts. I work for Your Castle Real Estate. We're the largest independently owned brokerage here in Colorado with over 700 realtors. So we do a lot of data analysis on what's happening here in Colorado and the Denver metro area. And we also keep track of what's happening on the national level too. So I really pour myself into these charts and graphs and stats and what we're learning here in Colorado, because I think it's really important for my clients when they are thinking about buying and selling, just so they're educated. So that's the kind of stuff I want to share with you today. So you've seen a lot of stuff, I'm sure, about the real estate market in the last 2 years, just being super, super hot. And we are slowing down right now, but honestly, we're getting back to 2019 levels of activity. So 2019 was a great year before we knew about COVID. Nobody was freaking out about the real estate market. So we're still in a more normal environment. But as I like to say, you know, I have a little bit of a lead foot. So when I'm driving, you know how you're going down the road and then you see a cop and you ease back up? That's kind of what it feels like right now. So if you're not speeding and you're going the speed limit, it feels slow by comparison. So that's kind of the environment we're in right now. And keep in mind that there's always going to be a shift when it comes to real estate. And it's just a matter of what that current environment means and who the opportunity is geared towards. So I'm going to go through a few charts here just to kind of present some information so you understand kind of where we've been over the last 40 years as to how we got here today. So this chart here shows the average appreciation here in the Denver metro area, which is actually about 6% annually over the last 45 years. So the solid line represents the home price, the average home price of homes, and then the dotted line is condos. So you can see back in the early 70s, you could pick up a house for roughly the price of a vehicle today. And we've had a lot of growth, especially over the last 2 years, where this has really jumped right up in terms of home price on average. You can see this dip here was our recession in 2008, 2009. Home prices, came down quite a bit, but we've been in a growth phase. Now we're projecting that the average home price is going to go down over the next year or so. Now, that doesn't mean that your home value is going to go down. Quite honestly, what I think is that we're going to have a product mix shift. So when interest rates were 2.5% and 3% on a mortgage over the last 2 years, it was a lot cheaper for people to buy more expensive homes, right? Now that we're 6-7% on a mortgage rate, people have to be a little bit more cautious about their budget and how much they're willing to spend. So imagine that you own a car dealership and you're having a great year and you are selling a ton of Lamborghinis, and those are high priced vehicles. And then the next year, the economy has shifted and a lot more people are interested in buying Toyotas, and those are certainly more affordable. Well, your average price is going to look lower. You might be selling the same volume of vehicles. It's just that the product mix of the price point is going to make it go down. So keep in mind, like I said earlier, the media likes to jump on that kind of stuff. So they're going to say, oh, the home prices have gone down, when it's actually the product mix of what people are buying. So not everybody can afford a multi-million-dollar house with higher interest rates. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to share a little bit about is that just because we are in a recession doesn't mean that we're in a housing crisis. So in the last 6 recessions, 4 of them, we actually didn't see home prices go down. And you may not realize this, but we were actually in a recession in 2020 in early pandemic days. And we actually had home prices go up 6%. Now, everybody remembers 2008 and home prices going down close to 20%. That was not a fun time period. And a lot of people did have to make some tough decisions at that time frame. But a recession has to do with GDP growth, and it doesn't mean that home prices are going to go down. So just kind of keep that in mind. So again, over the last 44 years, we've only had 4 years in which home prices went down, but on average, about a 6% annual appreciation. And in the last 2 years, we've seen double-digit appreciation, which really isn't sustainable. You can't do that for many, many years. So now we're getting more into that normal environment as far as what to expect in terms of appreciation on homes. Another thing I want to talk a lot about that impacts our real estate market is inventory. So that's the number of homes that are available for people to go ahead and purchase. So this chart here shows the solid line are those homes that were active and available to purchase, and the dotted line are those that actually sold. So you'll see a wave here, and that represents some seasonality because typically people buy, in the second and third quarter or warmer months versus this time of year, right? But the gap between these two lines actually represents the number of homes that were available to purchase. And you can see during the recession, there were a lot of homes available to buy. So there were foreclosures and bank-owned properties, or people just simply trying to sell their house, and they couldn't because there weren't enough buyers back at that time frame. As the economy started to improve, especially around 2014, you can see these two lines have basically been touching each other. So we've seen a lot of growth in terms of a lot of sales and not a lot of inventory. Now in 2019, we did see interest rates move up about 3/4 of a point. And so you can see these two lines start to separate. So we had more homes available. They weren't all getting gobbled up by buyers. And then during the pandemic, we're still kind of in it, but 2020, 21, you can actually see the number of homes that were sold is greater than those that were on the market. And that came out of a lot of desperation on the part of buyers. So they were writing letters, knocking on doors, just trying to find any home in the neighborhood they were interested in because they were so eager to buy a house. And so the data couldn't even keep up. Now that we're getting into that more normal environment, you can see that the dark purple line is going above the dotted line. So we are starting to see an increase of the number of homes that are available. So, back in the last 2 years, I'm sure you guys probably heard you had a neighbor or a friend that put their house on the market, and within 4 hours, they got an offer, right? Those days are kind of over. Now, heaven forbid, homes are staying on the market for the first weekend and maybe a week or two. And that's okay. That's normal. The stuff that we were seeing with people offering 6 figures above the asking price and multiple offers within the first weekend, those days are kind of over. It was just a bit of an anomaly and not really sustainable. One of the things I like to look at, again, is looking at the inventory, and you can see here how it's been adjusted over time. So let's look at 2019. So here are the average number of, or the number of homes that were available to purchase, which was 6,000 in the month of January. And then as we went through the year, you can see it's actually more inventory over the summer, a little bit less in the wintertime. Then here was 2020. We had less homes for sale, less than 2019. They were all getting gobbled up because people were so eager to buy homes with low interest rates. Then in 2021, oh my gosh, I remember January opening up the MLS, which is the database that realtors access to get information about homes for sale. And there would literally be times in specific large geographic areas where there would be like 12 houses available. And it was, and a couple of them were fixer up or tear down kind of situations. So we started out with very low inventories in 2021. And then in 2022, as interest rates started to go up, so did the inventory. So people weren't as eager to buy because they had to think a bit more about their budget. And we're starting to see more homes on the market. So we're getting, again, back to that 2019 level in terms of inventory and the overall market environment for real estate. And nobody was screaming and hollering and hooting over 2019, right? Like we still were selling houses. It's just, again, we're now going the speed limit, and that feels different. One of the things that we're really dealing with too is not a lot of homes are being built in the United States. And so that's creating an inventory issue. So if you look at the decade of 2010 to 2019, it's significantly less homes, and this is by the millions, than we saw in decades past. So after we went through the recession in 2008, a lot of builders put the brakes on new construction. They were just nervous about building an overbuilding and being stuck with homes that they couldn't sell. And so they really pulled back. And truthfully, we have a lot of people that are looking to start home ownership. So especially in Colorado, the greatest segment of our population is millennials, and they have just reached a median age of 30. So with that milestone birthday, they're thinking about getting married, starting a family, home ownership, and that typically is something when they, start a family and get married, they're thinking about buying their first home. So that's creating this tsunami effect of demand. And we have a lot of baby boomers and empty nesters that are living longer and they're healthier and they're not choosing to downsize just yet. And so they're not releasing that inventory of homes to those millennials. So we still have a lot of pent up demand and a lot of homes that people want to buy, but we're just not building enough to sustain that demand. The other thing we look at is, I'm sure you guys have heard the terms buyer's market versus a seller's market. And that's really kind of defined by something we call months of inventory. So if we had the same number of buyers, same number of sellers, all things being equal, how long would it take to deplete that inventory of homes for sale? Anything over a 4-month period is considered a buyer's market, and anything more than 6 months is a buyer's market, less than 4 is a seller's market. And you can see that for the last decade, we've solidly been in a seller's market, especially during the first 2 years of the pandemic. We were at a point where we had, 1 or 2 weeks worth of inventory. Now that the interest rates are increasing to more of a 40-year average for interest rates, and we're seeing more inventory of homes, we're still in a seller's market, but again, it's not that extreme situation that we had in the last 2 years where people could, not clean up their house, just throw it on the market, not do any prep, and they knew they were going to get offers. Now, got to put a little bit of effort in. You got to make the bed, you got to clean, you got to, paint the walls and have your house be presentable. The environment that we experienced over the last 2 years is going away. One thing I really like to look at that kind of shows me the activity of What's happening in the market and the demand is what we call showings. And that's when a buyer and their realtor go into a house to check it out. And this can be tracked by the showing services that we used here in Colorado, where agents go on an app and they request to see a house at a certain time with their client. And so we can see what the trends are. So I want to take you back to 2020. So we started out at the beginning of the year, kind of heard about this COVID thing, but weren't quite sure what it is. And then you remember middle of March, where we were all stuck at home watching Netflix. Well, we couldn't do any home showings at that time frame. So then things started opening up and demand really started to increase over the course of 2020. 21 was even greater. I mean, look at this arc here of the demands. Now, keep in mind, this is like spring break. So when people are out of town, you see less activity. And then we go here, and these dips are, 4th of July. So things leveled off. 22 started out even stronger. But again, as interest rates started to go up, demand started to go down. So we are in line with 2019 numbers right here. So more of a normal environment. We're just kind of out of that frenzy of the last 2 years. One of the things I want to also touch on when it comes to inventory is population growth as well in Colorado. So on average, we should have about 15,000 homes on the market at any given point in time. And at the end of Q3 for 22, we had about 5,000. So we're still not having enough houses on the market to be kind of balanced. Yeah, look at the growth in Colorado. I moved here in 2007 and we had 2.6 million people, and now we're well over 3 million. So it's a lot of folks that are living in the state, and a lot of them need house. Well, they all need a roof over their head, right? But keep in mind too, that we also have to look at the average number of homes per 1,000 people in the Denver metro area. So the average is 6.7, and we are under 1 home per 1,000 people. So again, not a lot of inventory. So while we might be in this situation where people are worried about interest rates or a recession, there's still not a lot of houses. And it's just supply and demand, economics 101, as far as what that means when you don't have enough supply. I mean, right now, I think the shortage is eggs at the grocery store. I heard they're $8 a dozen right now. You don't have enough eggs, people are going to pay more. Same with houses, right? And really, a lot of economists, especially some local folks, and Patty Silverstein is well known for her analysis on growth here and the economics within the Denver metro area, but she is forecasting still continued growth here in Colorado. So as more people come in, moving to Colorado from all over the US, again, it's creating a lot of inventory demand for homes. And she's been pretty spot on over the years. So what does all this mean for you? If you are a buyer and you're going to buy a house, coming in and trying to lowball on that home that fits your family's needs probably isn't going to get you real far. So, be reasonable as far as what that means for your budget. And then if the house fits your needs, make a reasonable offer. So coming in as a lowball isn't the environment that we're in today. Sellers are generally going to have the edge on negotiations, but it certainly isn't like it was the last 2 years where you could just have your list of demands and buyers had to comply with it. Now there's a little bit more of an even playing field, but it's a slight edge to the sellers. And then if you're an investor, you may have to have a little bit higher interest rate on that investment purchase, but keeping in mind that rents are still really strong. So as some people are hesitant to buy their first house, well, they're just going to continue to rent. And with that rental demand means that the rent amounts are going to continue to go up. One thing I really wanted to point out is that there's a big opportunity for people that own homes in the foothills. And this is an area that I live and work in. I work throughout the entire Denver metro area, but I have a lot of expertise in the foothills. And we're in a unique situation in the conifer, evergreen, Morrison, pine, Bailey area. When people think about moving to Colorado, they think about the setting of the mountains, the hills, the views, the trees, and that's their first choice when they're coming to buy in Colorado. And so they're still in demand. When you think about some of the suburbs that are the master plan communities down in Denver, you can buy a house in Thornton that's probably built by the same builder in Parker and in Littleton and Highlands Ranch and Centennial. So it's a little bit more homogenous, and certainly there's school districts and commute times to consider, but you can buy any home throughout those communities in the Denver metro area, and they're going to be pretty similar. But Foothills houses are pretty unique as far as views, access to trails and parks and activities. And that's where we still have a lot of demand because of the unique nature of the setting here. But it's becoming a little bit more balanced down in town, or as we say, down the hill. So if you're thinking about selling and maybe downsizing, and you currently own a home in the foothills, this is where there's a unique opportunity. I've helped some clients do this, whether they're moving down the hill or out of state. They capture all that equity that they've gained here in the foothills, and then they're able to move to the Denver metro area, closer to the city or out of state, and it's a little bit more balanced. So they don't get caught up in that frenzy of demand that we've seen over the last 2 years down in town. So you can maximize the sales price of your house in the foothills, move down the hill, move out of state, a little bit more balanced, and have a little bit extra money for that purchase. So keep that in mind as if that applies to you. Now, we've talked a lot about mortgage rates, and this can really have an impact on the real estate market, as we've seen just over the last 6 months or so. But I want to put something in perspective, again, as we move through 2023, is that mortgage rates have been all over the place over the last 50, 60 years. I mean, look at some of these average interest rates, in the 12s, 13s, well into the teens and the 80s, and what that would look like on a mortgage payment if you were buying a $600,000 house. So today, being just around 6-7%, really isn't terrible in the grand scheme of things. I think we were just all really spoiled with these super low interest rates over the last decade or so. And so you have to keep in mind that, the average 40-year average is about 7%. So we're not too far off from where we should be. And keep in mind too, if you were doing something 6 months ago versus today, maybe buying a house at about 700,000, when there was a lot of demand for housing, you might have to offer $50,000 over the asking price, and maybe have to just take the house as is. So that deck that's crumbling off the back of the house, or that roof that isn't really in great condition, or some of the things that you might be able to push back on a seller about, tough luck. You just have to deal with it, right? And maybe you'd have to offer to spend money between the appraised value and the purchase price if it didn't appraise. So there were a lot of concessions that buyers were making for sellers. Interest rates were lower, but you might have to come out of pocket with a lot more money for repairs after your purchase, making up a gap for an appraisal, and a slew of other things that were happening at that time frame. Today, if you had a house listed for $700,000, you know what? Maybe it's going to sell for just under at $680,000. So you're not going to have to come up with as much for a down payment or bridge that gap between the appraisal and the closed price. Your interest rate might be higher, but it certainly would lead to a greater payment. But at the end of the day, is that house work for your family? Does it provide you with enough bedrooms and space and access to the school district you want, or the setting that you're seeking? And I would argue that with inflation, a lot of people are making more per month with their salaries, and that $500,000 or that $500 a month difference is not as dramatic as it might seem. Now, with interest rates, keep in mind there's some options that are available out there. So we've used the terms date the rate and marry the house, and divorce the rent. So cut that out of your life if you can, because you don't get anything for rent, right? Somebody else is benefiting, and that's the owner of that home. So there's 2-1 buy down options, and then also lock and shop programs. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when you are working with a lender and you have a mortgage on your house, when you're getting your pre-approval, you tend to lock in on the interest rate. And while the interest rates are higher than they've been over the last couple of years, keep in mind, really look at what's going to work for your family. Buy the house that fits your needs in terms of space, location, all the things that we're talking about, because that's what you're locking in on for the next 5, 7, 10 years, whatever works for your family. When they say date the rate, it's buy the home, but keep in mind that you can always refinance the house or buy down the rate, or go into a different loan product. So get the house that fits your family's needs. And you can always make a change with the rate while you're still in that house that works for you. Now, 2-1 buy downs are something that are becoming more popular today. So let's talk a little bit about this, because this honestly hasn't been something that we've done in over a decade. And so a 2-1 buy down is a product that's available through the lender. And so what you're doing is actually getting a better rate, as much as 2% less than the current market rate. So let's say that the current market rate, for easy math, is 7%. So take 2 off of that. So the first year, you're going to save 2%. So your interest rate would actually be 5%. In the second year, you're going to save 1%. That's part of that 2-1 buy down. Okay. So now your interest rate is 6% or 1% below the current amount of 7%. And then in year 3, you're going to go up to that fixed rate of 7%. Okay. So the cost to doing this is about 2.5% of the loan. So if you're on a $600,000 house, you're probably talking about $15,000. Okay. Now you can save a lot of money in those first couple of years on your payments. And in the meantime, if the interest rates come down to a more favorable number for your budget, you can always refinance out of the locked or out of that rate into something more favorable for 30 years. Now, here's the key. If you see a seller that is selling their house and it's been on the market for a little bit, they're probably going to start thinking about being more flexible on the price. They're maybe considering a price adjustment with their realtor. For a lot of folks and sellers and homeowners, a $15,000 concession to the buyer to pay for this 2-1 buy down is a lot cheaper than, say, a $25,000 price reduction. So in many cases, it's kind of a win-win. So for the seller, they're not having to reduce the price as much, but they're willing to pay for this 2-1 buy down where you now have the benefit of this lower interest rate for a couple of years. And then you can kind of keep an eye on what's happening with interest rates and keep in touch with your lender and refinance once it gets to a more favorable amount. So this is something that really hasn't been used for, like I said, about 10 years because of the interest rates being low, but it's a really favorable option for people that are looking to buy. So keep that in mind. And if you need a reference for a lender, I know a lot of great ones. I can refer you to someone and they can talk to you a little bit more about that and what that means for your budget. So what are economists predicting for this coming year? So there's been all sorts of stuff in the news. So let's just kind of lay out what they're looking at. So as far as home prices, honestly, it's kind of all over the board. Redfin is saying that home prices are going to fall 4% nationally. Zillow says they're going to be flat. Realtor.com says we're going to see appreciation. So who even knows, right? Everybody's pontificating on what's going to happen. Oh, nobody's going to know until they can look in their rearview mirror and say for certain. But it's really kind of a mixed bag as far as what they're expecting for home values. Now, some things we have to think about in terms of sales is that overall sales are expected to be down. So your home might go up in value, but the volume of sales will likely be down just because the higher interest rates. Home prices are up from a couple years ago, so people are a little bit more hesitant to buy. And then there's a lot of economic concerns. So when people feel like there's uncertainty, they just don't make any decisions and don't do anything. So that's sometimes what we see in this kind of environment. Now, the National Association of Realtors, they've got a team of economists, and their chief economist is saying they expect home sales to decline by 7%, but prices would still be up 1%. So again, nobody really knows. They're kind of all over the place. But I would agree with home sales being down. We've seen this in the fourth quarter as interest rates have gone up. And things that are really influencing this beyond interest rates is just other economic factors. So what's happening in the US, the global economy, consumer confidence is a huge piece of that. And when you have high inflation, high gas prices, high food prices, it just makes people think twice about being bold and making that financial move. The Federal Reserve has been making a lot of interest rate adjustments. And so that gets people a little bit antsy because they don't know if the point in which they start their application, if the interest rate's going to go up. So that's why it's important to lock. Now, the labor market can have some influence on this too. If we don't have a lot of jobs, that's certainly going to impact how people react. And geopolitical issues too. I mean, you think about all the stuff happening between Russia and Ukraine and even just domestically. I mean, that just leaves a lot of uncertainty in some people's minds. But I always say that with all these other things happening, really worry about the things that you can control. So if having a house that fits your needs for your family, when you've got a new job or you're going through a divorce, there are always things that are necessitating a home purchase. And it doesn't matter what's happening across the pond or in the stock market, everybody needs a roof over their head. And sometimes that just means it's going to happen in the middle of all these other factors that are happening. Now, with inflation and interest rates, let's talk a little bit about how these are connected. So what's good is, even though we've had a lot of inflation, some of the recent reports that have gone out there are showing that inflation is slowing. Thank goodness, because we need that, right? Now, one of the things is that if inflation continues to slow, the 10-year Treasury will move down, and that is perfect for interest rates because it helps lower mortgage interest rates overall. And the lower the interest rates, the more affordable homeownership becomes, and then people can afford more. What was tough, honestly, over the last 12 months is starting around April or May, rather than taking a scalpel, the Fed really just took a hatchet to interest rates. And instead of being more precise, it was just constantly with these interest rate increases that really impacted people's affordability. And it was really like throwing a bucket of water on the fire. So rather than being a little bit more strategic and a little bit more minute in these adjustments, it was just these constant changes that was really impacting people's ability to buy. Now, we're expecting in 2023 that mortgage rates are going to stabilize. And the good news is that we're seeing that some mutual funds that tend to invest in stocks that benefit from slowing inflation, that's starting to see a lot of activity. So if Wall Street's looking at this inflation as being something that's temporary, that's a good sign. So all things worth noting for 2023. Now, this is something, these are kind of just theories I wanted to talk a little bit about in this year and what could happen. So remember, over the last 2 years, a lot of people have had the ability to work from home. And that actually led to a lot of home sales, especially here in Colorado. People from all over the US and even within Denver were saying, geez, I don't have to commute anymore. I've always wanted to live in Colorado and be skiing and do mountain activities, or I didn't want to live downtown. I want to live in the foothills, and now I don't have to commute. And that has led to a lot of home ownership changing and a lot of purchasing of homes. But, will working remotely allow people to migrate to cheaper parts of the country? Because there's certainly areas outside Colorado where home prices are much lower. As a matter of fact, I was on vacation last week and I met a couple from Calgary. I had no idea. I wanted to share this. Calgary is Denver's sister city. I don't know if you knew this. I actually found an article about it after I met this couple. They are 1,000 miles north of us, and they are at the same elevation. They have, they're half an hour from, being in the mountains and skiing, and have a lot of similar population and just very similar. So of course I was like, oh, I wonder what real estate costs in Canada. Oh my gosh, it was so much cheaper. However, as of the first of this year, Canada put a 2-year moratorium on non-Canadian citizens buying real estate in Canada because they had so much activity. So, and the other thing too is that the exchange rate was so favorable. I think it's 76 cents to the dollar or something. So you could buy a really big house for cheaper and then use your American dollars. It was a big difference. So those are the kind of things that people are thinking about, whether they're moving back home closer to family where real estate is cheaper, but there are opportunities out there. The other thing is, with these low mortgage rates, imagine you bought a house in the last 12 months, let's say 3%. Are a lot of homeowners going to be less likely to sell their house because they're like, oh, we have such a great interest rate, we don't want to move now. And they might have considered moving to a different community, but they feel locked in because they have this low interest rate. So is that going to create an inventory issue? Because you got all these people that don't want to move because they've got such a great interest rate. I don't know. We'll see what that looks like. Also, we have less new homes, less new construction happening, which has been something evident from that slide I showed previously. But if we're not keeping pace with the demand and the new construction builders are putting the brakes on new homes, are we going to continue to still have this shrinking inventory with growing demand, and then prices are going to go up? So these are all things to consider, that some of the actions that have happened over the last 6 months by the Fed and just shifts in the market, is how is that going to impact us this year? That'll be very interesting. When you look across the country, we talked a little bit about what people could do as far as migrating. The areas with the greatest growth could see the greatest change as far as deceleration of appreciation. So places in the West, the Sun Belt, the Carolinas, they have seen not as much growth because we had so much of it over the last 2 years. But you think about some more stable markets, I've got family from upstate New York and went to college in Buffalo. I tell you, real estate is super darn cheap out there. So there's other parts in the Rust Belt, Kansas City, Iowa, where I've got clients actually moving back to Iowa from Conifer, and they're going to get a great house. Things are a lot cheaper. So we've got some parts of the country that might be seeing a little bit of a population boom because their real estate is going to be a little bit more stable with less of these ups and downs and a little bit cheaper overall. So as we talk about foreclosures and recession, the natural conversation is, geez, are we going to find all these people with distressed homes that they can't sell because they're underwater? Well, keep in mind that the value of homes have gone up 40 to 60%, which is unbelievable just in the last 2 years. And with all of that growth in equity, even if we did see home prices fall 10 or 15%, it's going to be well above the 2019 values. So I don't see that being an issue where people are now going to be in foreclosure. The labor market's still strong. I'm sure you've seen that wherever you go, people are constantly hiring. And keep in mind, in 2008, the National Association of Realtors did a study and found that 49% of realtors were working with people that were in a distressed state. So they were in foreclosure and that were in threat of losing their home. And as of September of 2022, it was only 1%, which is very low. So we just don't see that we're going to have this onslaught of homes that are in foreclosure. So just less likely to see all of those delinquencies that are out there. And if somebody really did find themselves in a financial situation where they had to sell, it's likely that their value is up quite a bit from when they purchased the home. And so they're able to sell it and not have to give the keys back to the bank. And really, when you look at today versus 2008, there's so many environmental things and situational that are different between that time frame. So looking at the current market versus 2008, we're not seeing job cuts. We have a lot of jobs that are available. We don't have all those subprime loans. I mean, there was an environment and a time when if you could fog a mirror, people were getting loans. And that's just not the case. You have to go through this financial colonoscopy really before you can get a mortgage. And so that's just not the environment that we're in today. There's so much underwriting that's done on a borrower before they're given that loan. And we don't have as much new construction happening. We talked about that already. So we don't have all this glut of properties that are not selling, because we don't have as much inventory, and mortgage delinquencies are down. And like we talked about, homes in foreclosure, less than 1%. So this is not that kind of dire situation that we saw in 2008. So what does this all mean? What could we be looking at for 2023? So if you're a homeowner and you're thinking about selling, keep in mind that you do have to put a little bit more effort in right now than maybe you did a year ago to put your house on the market. I walked through so many houses that were in disarray, and people were still fighting over each other to make an offer on that house. That's just not the case. You have to take the proper steps, get your carpets clean, declutter, and get the house ready to put it on the market, because those offers of 6 figures above the asking price and getting a dozen offers through the first weekend, those days are over and pretty rare at this point. And keep in mind that buyers exist all year long. So sometimes I have folks that tell me, gosh, I don't want to put my house on the market during the holidays. I don't want to be inconvenienced or during the winter time. And honestly, I think that's the best time of year to put your house on the market, because you're not going to have window shoppers and looky-loos. If someone's willing to put on their snow boots and brave the cold weather to go shopping for a house, they're pretty darn motivated and they're looking, they're ready to move. So keep in mind, people got to move all year long. So it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily put it on in the summertime. And quite frankly, the data shows that the best time of year to put your house on the market in terms of demand really is March and April. So don't wait till June or July. You'll miss the boat. And you can call me if you want more information on that. Really try not to get emotionally attached to the process. I know it's tough, especially when it's your house, but try to think about it as a business decision and look at it from a numbers perspective, and take the advice of your realtor when it comes time to do that. And really think about your family's living needs and what works best for you right now. Don't try to time the market. I think that's when most people fail. So think about what works for your family and make that decision. Now, if you are someone that's looking to buy a house, the things to consider today is that interest rates might be higher than they were at the start of the pandemic. And if you missed that window, I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do to move back in time, and we're just kind of beyond it. That was just a once in a lifetime scenario that isn't going to come back. But we are closer to 40-year norms. About 7% is about what you see over the 40-year average. So that's not too bad. Don't forget, date the rate, you can marry the house. So you can always refinance, get that 2-1 buy down, get the house that fits your needs. So you're going to be happy in the area that you need to be. And also consider you're not going to be paying a premium above the asking price. So it's pretty common for people to be paying at, or maybe just a little bit below asking price. So having to offer, an arm and a leg over what the seller is seeking, that's kind of gone, which is pretty nice. And you're not going to have to make these snap decisions. Like you have 5 minutes to see the house and then have to write an offer right then. You have a little bit of time to really look at the home and make a solid decision that you're comfortable and confident with. And again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but think about your family's living needs and act accordingly. Don't try to time the market. And a lot of folks that I work with are investors, and I'm one myself. I have some rental properties, and you know what, with less competition, sellers are a little bit more flexible. So that's kind of nice. You're not competing with all these people that are looking for houses right now. So that gives you a little bit of breathing room if you're looking to buy an investment property, maybe a rental or something you can turn into a VRBO. There's some options out there. And while the rates might be up, don't forget, you can always ask those sellers to pay for that 2-1 buy down or a better interest rate. You can always refinance later. And when you're buying an investment property, just remember that there are a lot of different ways in which you are benefiting from owning an investment property. So it is the principal pay down reduction, which is coming through the form of the tenant paying rent, and you use that towards the mortgage payment every month. Your appreciation over time, cash flow, which is the difference between the gross rent and then what you're paying for your mortgage, and then a lot of tax benefits. So keep in mind that getting the best case scenario on all 4 of those aspects is pretty rare. So you may not be cash flowing as strongly with the interest rate environment that we're in today, but you've got 3 other things in which you could be benefiting over time. And having investment properties, that's not something that's a quick get rich quick scheme. So if I ever have someone call me and they're like, oh, we're going to make all this money in 6 months. No, it's not happening. You have to be realistic. That's the long game, just like when you're planning for retirement. So keep in mind that you can always refinance, get that property now, benefit from all the other things that are part of owning an investment property. And again, with some buyers being a little bit more hesitant and not purchasing, there are more opportunities for rents to be pretty strong and low vacancies. So it still puts you in a good position if you want to be an investor and buy an investment portfolio. I'm happy to talk to you through that because there are some good opportunities there. And let me just go to this last slide. So again, don't forget that as the market conditions are today, we are not going to be in the 2020 and 2021 environment. That was just an anomaly and really not sustainable. I think a healthier market is a little bit more balanced, which is kind of what we're returning to. People don't have to make snap decisions, and people don't have to give up their firstborn to get a house, and it gets a little bit more even playing field. Don't forget, people move all the time. There's always things that happen in life that require someone to buy or sell a house. So don't try to time the market. And I've said it before, I'll say it a million times, do what works best for your family's needs. Don't try to time the market, regardless of what happens here in 2023 with interest rates, demand, inventory. If you've got to move and it makes sense, think about what's best for your family and what's going to make you happy and put you in the right house for your needs. So with that, I am happy to open it up to any questions. If anybody has anything they want to throw in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute, happy to ask, answer any questions that you have. I can certainly go on for a long time about this stuff, but if there's anything you'd like to talk about, I'm happy to do that now too. So fire away.
Hey, Jackie, it's Lisa. I just want to say thank you. Hi. Hey, this was really informative. I've learned a lot. Unfortunately, I think now I'm thinking about Canada.
I tell you, I started doing a little Googling.
No, I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot. So thank you. You've got me thinking. I don't really have any questions. It was really informative. So thanks.
Good. I'm glad. Cool. And anybody too, if you feel like there's something else you'd like to learn, let me know too, because I'm always changing and modifying this presentation just to make sure that it's useful for everybody. So if there's anybody else that wants to jump in, feel free. I also am teaching a lot of classes, so I'm going to have one at the end of this month about downsizing your home. So if that's something that's of interest of you, I will email out to the attendees a link to my Eventbrite page where I have that class listed, and I have another one that's going to be coming up about building your custom home versus buying one. What are the pros and cons? Done that myself. I've been in my house for 5 years, so I can speak intelligently about the experience. So we'll be sharing that as well. And we'll be doing some other stuff about investing. If that's something anybody's interested in doing, can give you kind of investing 101, whether you're doing a long-term or short-term rental. There's a lot of options out there, and I've seen a lot of clients benefit from that. So again, happy to answer any other questions. You want to throw it in the chat or pipe up. Otherwise, thank you again for attending, and I'll hang on here just for another moment. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. Happy New Year, and hope it's a healthy and safe one for you. Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and end right now, but thank you again for joining. Appreciate it, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye.